agar caviar, ganache, spherification and spaghettification, and emulsification to make a transparent ravioli, a sugar dome pastry. When I was younger, I was constantly hanging around classicists, in other words, failed chefs who paid $50K to go to food college somewhere in the big city. The restaurant I worked at dealt with a certain high-end food, something that'd be considered fancy. It didn't have any Michelin stars, mind you, or even a freaking visit from Guy Fieri, but we were up there in terms of a restaurant in middle-class suburbia. So because of these chefs, I got to sample some of the best foods of classical gastronomy: creme brulee, banana flambé, and steak à poivre, or however you pronounce that. Anyways, I remember when molecular gastronomy was first exploding onto the scene, when all these Michelin star chefs started freezing things with dry ice or making different liquids into all sorts of gels and foams. And I remember desperately wanting to try all that. I remember trying to imagine what something so earth-shatteringly different might taste like. But more I dug into the world of molecular gastronomy, the more I started to realize just how similar it was to my world of classical cooking. Sometimes I'd be like, wait, this is just a tagliatelle, or wait, this is just scallions with sauce, or wait, this is just caprese. And then it all started to click after I watched one YouTube short.
Just keep it simple, that's what it's all about. And the methods are exactly the same. And they can label it molecular, but the truth is, it's classical cuisine. That's all it is. We live in a world of refinement, not invention.
At first, I couldn't really accept it. I couldn't accept the fact that molecular gastronomy was just this thing for show, that it didn't present any new flavors whatsoever. So I went about on my own little journey, making all sorts of molecular gastronomy. I bought all these emulsifiers and gelatins. I started using my food processor and strainer the first time in months. I relearned how to bake and make sauces again. I bought special equipment and put oil in a freezer and made caramel into a bowl. I did all sorts of random shit, and eventually I was able to learn enough to be able to consistently craft a 3-course meal. And after I ate it, I just felt disappointed. Throughout the entire process, I was kind of disappointed. I just kept looking at all my ingredients, and while I was cooking, I kept thinking about all sorts of little things. Like how the agar is just going to ruin the consistency of my balsamic vinegar, or how the beet gel featured too few spices. I had to sacrifice so many small things for the sake of molecular gastronomy, and this really got me thinking, why the hell do we glorify it so much? Why do we tolerate our food being stuffed into spheres and coming out of a syringe just to make things look better? Why couldn't we just be happy with those good old days when a 3-star Michelin meal meant having an entire bowl of risotto or a mountain of garlic butter ravioli? And most importantly, what does this mean for us? What does it mean that we've transferred from different ages of gastronomy, where it went from feeding the crap out of your customers to barely feeding them at all to just kind of feeding them? What's the sociology behind all that? First off, let's just take a look at the food. In the 80s, gastronomy was all about pasta, fish, and steak. Basically just French or Italian food. Let's look at the interior design of some of these restaurants. Here we can see floral wallpaper, silk upholstery, intricate chandeliers accompanied by candles and white tablecloth. While in the early 2000s, we saw the emergence of molecular gastronomy with deconstructed foods and spherification and gels. This correlates to an era of design where minimalism was seen as the apex. The new iPhone had just emerged, a smooth white brick without any edges or rigid features. IKEA furniture only came out in shades of gray and brown or just in black and white. And fashion took a turn for the worst as everyone just wore jeans and t-shirts. Food used to exist within a very maximalist world, where more was seen as better. But just like with anything in history, we overcorrected and went straight to minimalism. And now we've hit an intersection between the two. If you look at multi-Michelin star restaurants today, we see a lot more aspects of molecular gastronomy, most notably the usage of microherbage, smaller portion sizes, garnishes. But there's a lot more aspects of classical cooking as well, most notably meat. If you think of classical cooking, you just think of like a big cut of steak or chicken or fish smothered in sauce. And let's take a look at the sauce. There's less of a reliance on foams and gels, and you see more traditional sauces being plated. Sauces that require unholy amounts of butter or something that has to be reduced for like 3 fucking hours. And that's the thing about high-end cooking, is that it's all classical cooking. Go to any food college in America, and the first thing they're going to teach you probably is like how to clarify a broth. not how to freeze dry ice or turn a beet into a gel. The plating may be different, and so might the garnishes, but at the end of the day, it's still just a good-ass cut of seafood or meat smothered in a sauce. Like, let's take a look at this menu from a 3-star Michelin restaurant, alright? This is per se from New York. So here we have gazpacho, that's Italian, oysters, timeless dish, see that in any time period after the 50s, sorbet, again Italian, custard, French, scrambled eggs, French, artichoke salad, also French, bread and butter, that's either or. Let's look at another restaurant, 11 Madison Park. Another 3-star restaurant. Alright, already I see a bunch of French and Italian stuff. Caviar, beef, foie gras, whitefish. It's all just French or Italian. Absolutely nothing has changed. Go to any high-end restaurant in the Western world, and the hallmark of food is always going to be French and Italian, just under different disguises. And that's where I go into my second point. The flavor profile of food has not changed. It's all classical cooking under the disguise of molecular gastronomy. The flavors are all the same, the only thing that's changed is presentation. But along with presentation, there's this wider stratification between social classes. Back then, it was a leap for a middle-class family to enjoy some shrimp tagliatelle or some clams on ice, but it was at least possible. Perhaps mom could go to a local fishmonger and set aside an entire afternoon to prep pasta. Back then, high-end food was more practical and readily accessible, but it all changed. Somewhere along the way, we looked at this and thought it was wrong, because at the end of the day, we're still animals. If I'm a chimpanzee who has a stick, I'm automatically better than all the other chimpanzees who don't have a stick. But if some other chimpanzee could just go to the forest floor and pick up a stick for himself, then what's the point? It's the same for a rich person. If I'm a rich person and I see a middle-class family eating all the same things that I eat, then what's even the point of being rich? Go to any movie theater or watch any TV show, and the indicator of wealth is always going to be the food. I think a perfect example of this phenomena is coffee. Everybody drinks coffee nowadays. Some people are stuck with drinking instant coffee. Some people have the time to go to Starbucks or a local cafe, but what about the rich people? The thing about coffee is that it's all good. Even the instant stuff tastes fine. You can make a cup of coffee right now in a Keurig machine, and it probably tastes just as good as something as you can get from a cafe. But what if you want to make it better? What if you want to have coffee that no one else can have? Well, it's possible, but not really. I once talked to a guy who's an absolute pro at making coffee, like he even knew the science behind it. He had this $10,000 setup, got his beans directly imported to his home, like they were still in sacks when they arrived. And one of the things that this guy told me is that despite all his best efforts, despite all his years of training, despite the freshness and quality of all his ingredients, the best he could ever do was make a cup of coffee that was 10 to 20% better than what you could find at a cafe. 10 to 20%. Now, if you're a rich person and you want to make yourself seem different, you're going to gun for that 10 to 20%. Even if you don't have a palate that's sensitive enough to detect that 10 to 20%, you're still going to want to buy it. That's how the modern world is. We now live in a world full of good food. I mean, I can't even remember the last time I ate a bad meal. Like, fast food is awesome. Bro, 7-Eleven nachos on a Saturday night? Banging. Alright? And freezer food tastes not great, but not bad either. Cheap coffee is like cheap food. It's not bad, it's not great, it's just kinda good, but not really. But at least it's not like bad. But if you cook something at home or eat out at a restaurant, it's usually pretty good. And nowadays, you can have all sorts of ingredients and equipment shipped straight to your home. You also have YouTube, so you can just follow along certain videos and make just about anything. So the bar for perfection is at its highest. We have now entered a stage of cookery where we are absolutely gunning for that 10 to 20% improvement. I'm talking about spending thousands on equipment, hiring only chefs who've worked in the best places, spending hundreds of dollars on each ingredient. Like, if the world of modern cooking feels a bit ridiculous to you, it should. It should. And you know what's silly? Is that nobody can really achieve that 10 to 20% improvement. But it doesn't really matter because the people eating that food, they don't have the palates to recognize it. So instead, restaurants try to score a bunch of brownie points through visuals and presentation. That's why you have all these fancy garnishes and smaller portion sizes and ceramic plates, because it all contributes to this modernist aesthetic. You know, this sort of brings to mind something a coworker had once said to me. One day we were at this store selling all sorts of kitchen equipment, and it wasn't even a restaurant depot, mind you. It was just a store targeted towards home chefs. We reached this one wall full of all sorts of trinkets and equipment, and he said to me, "It's all bullshit." Imagine that. One of the greatest chefs I'd ever known looking at a wall that spanned a quarter of the store and telling me it's all bullshit. And that's something I actually want to tell you, is that if you ever feel like you're missing out on a lot of great food around you, like you're envious of all those people vacationing and eating all this fancy shit on TikTok or Instagram or something, don't. I mean, here, let's do an exercise. Just take a moment to think back on all the good food you've eaten throughout your life, okay? Now, during that entire time, did you ever go like, "Oh my god, that was amazing"? Probably not. Most likely your response was just, "Yeah, that was good." Alright, that's the same with me. That's what I mean. Food is all relative. Spending money on food doesn't really guarantee better flavor. As someone who's been to hundreds of restaurants of all varieties and price ranges, I can guarantee you, the only thing that spending more money guarantees you is better service and better looking plates. I've met chefs of all walks of life. Some of them went to culinary school, some of them had worked at really high-end places, some of them were just in charge of a deep fryer at a franchise. And let me tell you, where a chef works does not determine how well they cook. I've seen absolute artists who belong on MasterChef being forced to serve hamburgers because nowhere else was hiring. I have seen a white guy outperform Mexican chefs at a Mexican restaurant and a Mexican chef outperform every Korean in a Korean restaurant. We live in a world where, unfortunately, people don't have trained palates. They don't know what they're looking for when it comes to their food. We also live in a world where you can find a shitty chef in just about any kitchen, regardless of how high-end it may be. Because of this disparity, I've had really great meals in really shitty restaurants, and I've had really bad meals at really good-looking restaurants. At the end of the day, all that matters is two things. One, are you full? And two, did it taste good to you? I think we live in a world now where we're always chasing, just chasing the next big fancy thing. And what we really need to do is just take some time, take a step back, really appreciate what we've got going for us. And so if you're still dead set on spending a bunch of money on fancy restaurants on your next vacation, let me just tell you this. At the expense of my own wallet, I have been to dozens of high-end places. During all those years of good eating, I've only been to 2 restaurants that ever provided me that, "Oh my gosh, that was an amazing experience." Now, you may think differently. You may have a restaurant in mind where you're like, "Oh, that was good." But, you know, give it a few more years, okay? Right now, you might have a dish in mind where you were like, "Oh my gosh, I am so glad I paid $50 for that." But just give it a few more years, and I guarantee you, you won't even remember what the dang thing tasted like, alright? And also, the 2 restaurants that I was referring to, I didn't even order an entree. I just ordered appetizers. I must have spent like, what? A total of like $30? Like, I had my whole world turned upside down just for $30. You see, you don't need to spend a bunch of money to have a good experience. If you're dead set on trying new stuff that, like I am, you know, just settle for an appetizer. Live within your means. Fuck, I'm saying all these things now, and they sound contradictory, but you get what I mean, I think. I don't know, who the fuck knows anymore. Okay, bye. I love you.